This just in. Now that Artemis I's mission's finally up and kicking, it's breaking records left and right. Apparently, the spacecraft has reached the farthest distance from Earth by a human-rated spacecraft, and folks over at NASA are over the moon. In this video, we'll walk through the nitty-gritty details of this record, and also some other cool science updates from NASA HQ. Curious to see what the hype's about? Well, keep watching to know more. Starting off with Artemis I's latest achievement.
3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis I. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
NASA's given us pretty cool moments over the years, from picturesque views of the cosmos to the time when it showed us the origin of time through James Webb. It's all been incredibly awesome to witness. Who knew that man stepping on the moon would lead up to discovery after discovery of the infinite universe beyond Earth's exosphere? And still, after years of research and catapulting spacecrafts and satellites into space, we're still nowhere close to mapping the entire universe. Word on the street says that so far, we've covered only 5% of the universe, and the rest of the 95% is just out there vibing in all its mysterious glory. Now, reeling it back to Artemis I. If you followed our previous videos, then you'll know that Artemis I's a part of a series of super complex space missions that will help us understand the moon and Mars in much greater detail. Sure, we've literally been to the moon, and Mars is our best neighbor at this point, but it wouldn't hurt to dive deeper into the unknown now, would it? After a series of delays when Artemis I finally launched, we were all pretty excited to see what information it would relay back to Earth. According to the data that's been relayed back to Earth, the spacecraft has reached the furthest distance from our planet that's ever been achieved by a human-rated spacecraft. That means Artemis I has covered the longest distance at 268,563 miles, surpassing Apollo 13, which had 3 members on board and traveled somewhere around 249,000 miles. Up next, there was even a little hiccup along the way. Now, sure.
Goal of Artemis is return humanity to the moon as a whole program and have a sustained presence there. So this won't be just visits to the moon. This will be a sustained presence both on the surface and around the moon.
It's all monumental for a spacecraft to exceed expectations, but when you're sending anything into space, there's obviously going to be little bumps along the way. Except these bumps would be astronomical, considering there's no medium in space and all. After the successful liftoff from the Kennedy Space Center, everyone thought the Artemis I mission was going to be smooth sailing for all parties involved. Except it wasn't. For a brief moment in time, the Orion capsule, the partially reusable crewed spacecraft a part of the Artemis program, had suddenly lost contact with the deep space network, and you best believe it left everyone in a state of shock and worry. For 47 minutes, there was absolutely no way to know what had happened to the Orion capsule, and as a result, NASA worked tirelessly to restore the connections. Eventually, all was well, and the space organization was able to confirm the healthy status of the spacecraft. It's still a mystery as to what actually happened. Even though it's supposed to be a human-rated spacecraft, so far, Artemis I's been an uncrewed mission. This is because NASA wants to test how these next-generation systems can be used for deep space travel. And of course, when you want to achieve such a feat in the future, glitches like this one's not exactly ideal. Let's talk more about the mission. As we talked about earlier,
now started its journey back to Earth. It's expected to plunge through the Earth's atmosphere and splash down just off the coast of San Diego in the Pacific Ocean this Sunday.
The Artemis missions will center mostly around scientific studies of the lunar surface and dive deeper into the nitty-gritty details of the moon. These missions are undoubtedly one of the most ambitious space missions set out by NASA and will be conducted in 3 phases that are currently in progress. The first one's Artemis I, which was sort of like an uncrewed test flight, and as we saw with its recent flight, it successfully sent us back a couple of photos which included the craft, the Earth, and the moon all together in one shot. And here we are struggling to get all our friends in one frame. While the first ejection was uncrewed, the second one will have a crew on board, and it'll take the people on board the furthest anyone's ever been in space, way past the Apollo 13 boys. And lastly, in the third part of the mission, Artemis III will land the first female and the first astronaut of color on the moon, who will then spend a week conducting their experiments and studies on the moon in order to collect data to reveal more about our giant chunk of cheese. For now though, we're all anxiously waiting for the Orion capsule for its big splashdown in the Pacific Ocean soon, so you guys better wear your best raincoats if you want to see history. Not to mention, the team behind Artemis I's incredibly proud of the record. Obviously, manning a mission like Artemis, be it from the front line or from the control room, it's one heck of an achievement. But still, NASA's administrator Bill Nelson couldn't stop beaming after Orion Orion's successful flight. He said that because of the unbelievable can-do spirit of everyone involved in these missions, Artemis I had extraordinary success. It was because of the tireless efforts of all the engineers and crew members involved, and he owes this historic moment to them. He also shared that even though the mission has gone by smoothly, he believes all of this is just a test, and that's what they do. They test it, and people like Bill stress it. Sounds like a good bargain to us. Now that we've talked about Artemis I's new record, let's learn more about what's cooking at NASA HQ. As we know, the space organization's got a lot on its plate. With several active missions right now, it's certainly keeping itself busy, and if that's not enough, NASA's now developing a pressurized lunar rover for its Artemis mission astronauts. Don't worry, if that's too far out of your domain, then we've got you covered. Up next, we'll talk about NASA's new pressurized lunar rover. NASA's ambitious efforts to take the Artemis missions one step further are not going unnoticed. Considering this is NASA's comeback to putting astronauts back on the moon again, it's understandable they want to use the best of the best technology. Teaming up with the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA, folks over at NASA are now designing a prototype for a pressurized lunar rover in the northern Arizona desert. And all of this is being done so that they have an up-and-functioning rover ready for Artemis VII. Yup, 7. There's still so much more to come, you guys. Now, we know the Arizona desert's not the most ideal place when it comes to a vacation spot, but it's actually the perfect environment to test out such prototypes. As per officials at NASA, the desert has a terrain similar to that of the lunar environment. It's challenging, it has interesting geology, and has minimal communications infrastructure. So it's actually the perfect place for these Artemis missions, and has been so since the Apollo testing in the 1960s. Now, what are these new rovers for? Obviously, since there's nothing like the plaza on the moon, our lovely astronauts will have to get used to spending their days in a rover while they carry out their experiments and collect data. And to stimulate that environment, the rovers are being made so that the crew members will have a mini base to live in while away from the permanent lunar base camp that NASA's aiming to build. Earlier this year, a part of such training already took place when a couple of astronauts and experts from JAXA and NASA already rotated through living and operating out of the pressurized rovers for 3-day stints. This included conducting simulated moonwalks too, and also allowed the team to gather more information about the design of the rover. Speaking of, the design of the rover is built in such a way that'll allow the astronauts to live and work comfortably inside the rover for extended periods of time. Sure, it won't be home, duh, but it'll still be an experience of a lifetime, kind of like an RV for space, equipped with air, water, food, hygiene equipment, and maybe even a PS5 in between. Last but not least, when can we expect them to roll out? As we mentioned a couple of minutes ago, these rovers are being made so that astronauts on Artemis VII have every comfort at arm's length in space. But considering how tedious these trials are, it's no surprise that the rovers are expected to be up and running by 2030. While the US and Japan are aiming to roll out a finalized design by 2023, knowing how much work's going to go into the parts and the assembling of these rovers, not to mention the vulnerability tests, it's going to take some time until we see a final version of these pressurized rovers. But whenever that may be, we know it's going to be a historic moment nonetheless. And that's a wrap for this video, you guys. What do you think about Artemis I's new record? Think NASA's going to be able to break it anytime soon? Let us know what you think in the comments section down below. As always, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this. Until next time, see you soon.